This is a gross game, guys. This is a disgusting game. 36.5 point over under. This is the lowest over under of the week. Vegas is telling us this game is probably going to suck the most. It's going to be the most boring. And honestly, when I think about these running backs in this matchup, I'm not excited about any single one of these names. Let's talk about running backs that you should start, or more importantly, guys that you should sit heading into week 2 of fantasy football. We're going to cover every team, 32 teams, 16 total matchups, straight into it with Thursday night football. We got back-to-back bangers from week 1 to week 2, Chiefs, Ravens, and now Bills at Dolphins for Thursday night. 48.5 point over under, and Miami is favorite at home. This is tied for the third highest over under of the week, so we should see a lot of fantasy cheese from Thursday night. And this is also tied for the closest spread of the week, meaning Vegas thinks this could be a very tight game all the way through, a very competitive game all the way through. Let's start with the Bills side of the ball. Last week, the Dolphins gave up the 19th most points to fantasy running backs, so they were pretty much middle of the pack. Defense is not bad whatsoever, but James Cook remains a must start. 22 touches in week 1, and he looked great. They used him in the air, on the ground. Unfortunately, if you have James Cook, you have to be okay with the reality that Josh Allen is going to vulture some touchdowns. On to the Dolphins side of the ball. Now, it's really important for you to know that at the time of recording this video, Achane and Mostert are both not practicing. That might change by the time this video comes out, but you have to monitor this closely. If Achane and Mostert both miss time, Jalen Wright would absolutely become a must start. You could even consider Jeff Wilson, but at this point in time, let's assume that they are going to play. Devon Achane is a top 5 running back for me in week 2. Incredible matchup versus the Bills, who gave up top 5 points to running backs last week. Raheem Mostert, however, not a player I'm currently comfortable starting. He only had 9 touches and played 44% of the snaps. If you look last week, the way that they distributed snaps, you can see Raheem Mostert, 24 snaps to Devon Achane's 30. You can see on the goal line, Devon Achane got both attempts. It's just they're using him in the air. They're using him on the important downs. And that's something that has changed from last year to this year. So I just don't think you can start Mostert unless he is truly your best option. All right, the second game we're going to talk about, this is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. We've got Raiders at Ravens, 41.5 point over under. And this is the largest spread of the week, meaning Vegas thinks that, and not the Raiders, I mean the sports books. The sports books think that the Raiders are going to get dominated. They think that the Ravens are going to absolutely dominate this game, win by multiple touchdowns, multiple scores. So this could be a huge game, a huge bounce back for Derrick Henry. In fact, I am anticipating a huge bounce back. Let's go and call him a star of the week for me. Derrick Henry, my RB11. This is the type of game script that I want to see for Derrick Henry on my schedule. So he has got to be in every single lineups. Now, as far as Justice Hill goes, I do not think you can start him in any format whatsoever. The only reason he was somewhat relevant last week is because this team was down for most of the game versus the Kansas City Chiefs. This should be a positive game script. I don't see how you could honestly start a name like Justice Hill. For the Raiders, I don't see any clear start. I hate the Raiders running backs this week. We thought that Zamir White would be a workhorse. Why? Because that's what the coaching staff said pretty consistently. Unfortunately, last week, you can see here, Alexander Mattison played more snaps than Zamir White, 36 to 23. And he also had some early down work, 2-minute drills, third down. So it's hard to really envision a true upside for either one of these names. So I don't personally think you can start them. Zamir White in a game where the game script might be positive could absolutely go off. I just don't see that happening versus Baltimore. The third matchup we're going to look at here is the Chargers at the Panthers. Wow. The Panthers are maybe worse than they were last year. How is that even possible? But it is. This is tied for the second lowest over-under of the week. So Vegas does not think there will be many fantasy points in this one. J.K. Dobbins, I am labeling a must start. This is a fantastic matchup. The Panthers were terrible against running backs in 2023, and then they come out in week 1 and give up the second most points to fantasy running backs last week. J.K. Dobbins looks like he is going to be the guy. Played 58% of the snaps last week. Had 13 total touches. Gus Edwards had 12 total touches, but it seems like J.K. Dobbins is going to slowly build up that momentum and be the guy to start. He also looked incredible, averaged over 13 yards per carry, over 130 yards on just 10 attempts, and he got into the end zone. J.K. Dobbins to me is a must start and a very good matchup. Gus in deeper leagues, you could consider it, but I would say 85% of people have a better option than Gus Edwards this week. onto the Panthers side of the ball. They now face the Chargers, who were middle of the pack last week versus running backs, but there is genuinely nobody that you can start in this backfield whatsoever. If you drafted Chuba Hubbard, you thought, you know what? He's going to be the volume guy. He got all the work last year. Miles Sanders was not a factor. Well, breaking news here in week 1, these guys split carries pretty much down the middle, and in a terrible offense where you are splitting touches, nobody can be started whatsoever. The fourth matchup we're going to look at here is the Saints at the Cowboys, 45.5 point over under, and the Cowboys are favored. What a hot start for the Saints. One of my starts of the week last week was Alvin Kamara. He did have 22 PPR points and he looked very efficient on the ground. Now, of course, that was versus the Panthers. Now you have to face the Cowboys defense. So it might be a little bit different of a story, but you got to start Alvin Kamara. 5 targets in the air, a rushing touchdown on the ground. A lot of people were worried his touchdowns might get vultured. He still had an opportunity to score a touchdown this week. My RB9, top 10 play, you got to put him in there. Let's talk about the Cowboys, okay? Number 1, this is a terrible matchup. We saw in week 1 how good this Saints defense is. We saw how good their run defense is. We saw how good they were just as a complete defense. So the matchup is terrible. You got a split backfield where Zeke had 32 snaps to Rico's 28. I'm showing you on the screen right now, okay? You can start Zeke. Why? Because he got the goal line work in week 1. So he can be a spot start for you if you're in a tough position. However, Rico Dowdle, if you were out there and you were like a Rico Dowdle truther, I'm sorry, there's literally no reason right now to indicate to us that you can start him. 4 fantasy points in week 1, and now he goes up against a very difficult matchup, and he's not the goal line guy. No, he can't be in any lineups whatsoever. Okay, let's move on to the Bucs at the Lions. 50.5 point over under. The Lions are favored at home, and this is the highest over under of the week. This should be a huge game for fantasy football. Let's start with the Lions backfield. The Lions backfield scored the 3rd most points of any backfield combined in week 1. I anticipate that to be a trend this entire offseason. This should be a great backfield the entire year. Jahmyr Gibbs, a must start, a top 10 play. David Montgomery, a must start, a top 20 play for me as my RB18. Got into the end zone last week. The difficult part is if you take those rushing touchdowns away, you know, his upside in a PPR league is a little bit limited, but you got to play him against a defense, by the way, that gave up the 8th most points to running backs last week. This is the Bucs versus the Commanders. That's what happened. But let's talk about the Bucs side of the ball. Rachaad White dominated touches in week 1. He played 41% of the snaps compared to Bucky Irving's 17. He played 26 snaps on early downs. He had all the goal line work, and he played 10 out of 12 third down snaps. Now, I understand Bucky Irving got in there, but guys, you got to keep in mind the context is important. Why did Bucky Irving get in the game? Because the Bucs were dominating this game pretty much the entire way through. I can tell you this as a Commanders fan. They were up the entire game. They didn't really need Rachaad White. They didn't really need Mike Evans in the second half or Chris Godwin. So they were able to feature Bucky Irving a little bit more. But don't worry, Rachaad White is still that dude. All right, the 6th matchup we're going to look at is the Colts at the Packers. 40.5 point over under. The Colts are favored away from home. This obviously has everything to do with Jordan Love. At the moment, we don't anticipate him playing. Does that impact Josh Jacobs? Yes, but you are still going to start Josh Jacobs. The Colts were a great matchup for running backs last year. They were top 10. And in week 1, they gave up the 7th most points to fantasy running backs. So Josh Jacobs is going to get enough volume with the injuries to that backfield. It's a volume play, right? You just have to hope that the entire offense funnels through him. Dump offs from Malik Willis or whoever's going to be the quarterback there. But Josh Jacobs, purely based off of volume, should absolutely be in lineups, my RB19 this week. As far as the Colts go, Jonathan Taylor is my RB12 on the week. Now, this has been a surprise for people all offseason. I have had Jonathan Taylor ranked lower in my rankings, lower, pretty much every time I dropped a running back ranking video, someone was super upset because I had Jonathan Taylor too low. Now, this was my concern. My concern the entire time was I don't think there's going to be target share there. Why? Because Anthony Richardson, when he's in trouble, is going to take off with his legs. He does not need to dump the ball off to Jonathan Taylor. He is the most athletic quarterback of all time, point blank, period. The other concern is that on the goal line, Anthony Richardson could vulture some opportunities. We saw both of those things ring true in week 1. Jonathan Taylor under 11 fantasy points, and he scored a touchdown. So here's the good news. I played bad cop. Let's play good cop. The good news is the Packers gave up the most points of fantasy running backs in week 1. Now they faced Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley was a focal point of that Eagles offense, but maybe that could happen for Jonathan Taylor in a relatively plus matchup. Regardless, you got to start the guy. All right, the 7th matchup we're looking at here is Browns at Jaguars, a 41.5 point over under here. Let's start with the Browns side of the ball. This is purely a volume play for Jerome Ford, who in week 1 had 19 total touches, including 7 targets. And if you see the distribution of snaps, it's really in favor of Jerome Ford. 57 snaps. The second highest was Pierre Strong with 18. He had all the early down work, all the goal line work. He was out there for third downs. So purely from a volume perspective on a half decent offense, you can start Jerome Ford. However, lower expectations against this Jags defense, because while they gave up the 6th most points to fantasy running backs last week, that was mostly through the air to Devon Achane. They were actually super good as a rush defense against Mostert, against Achane, one of the most efficient backfields in the NFL last year, and they held them to well under 4 yards per carry. So do not sleep on the Jags D, but purely based off volume, you can play Jerome Ford. As far as the Jaguars go, okay, I've got Travis Etienne ranked as my RB20 on the week, way lower than what I had him last week, okay? He had 15 touches in a neutral game script, okay? I'm a little bit concerned about Etienne. I still am going to label him a must start, and people are going to comment, well, you got to watch the game, dude, because he was almost in the end zone. Well, why did he not get into the end zone? Because he fumbled the ball. Guys, we know Doug Peterson does not play games when you fumble. And you've got Tank Bigsby, who's now rotating in and out, being a really efficient player. I think the ceiling could be a little bit capped for an Etienne. I mean, Bigsby averaged over 6 yards per carry in week 1, was super efficient with every touch that he got. But still, you got to start Etienne. Bigsby remains a stash. I would not be surprised if he has a bigger role. But as for now, we can't panic too much. Last week, Travis Etienne played 37 snaps to Tank Bigsby's 17. The issue is they just used Bigsby more often when he was on the field. All right, the 8th matchup we're going to look at is the 49ers at the Falcons. Okay, so at the time of recording this, it is after Monday Night Football. And there was a report from Adam Schefter who basically said he doesn't think that CMC will be available for week 1. I am ranking CMC as my RB1 as if he will be available. You have to recognize there's a chance he's not. If he is not available, Jordan Mason will be a top 12 start for me here in week 2 versus the Minnesota Vikings. Absolute must start. Jordan Mason, his first start ever on Monday Night Football, 22 fantasy points, 147 rushing yards, averaged over 5 yards per carry, and got into the end zone. So if he remains the starter for this ultra impressive offense in San Francisco in week 2, you gotta start Jordan Mason, point blank, period. As far as the Viking side of the ball, I was very excited to start Aaron Jones last week. This week, he's a top 24 play for me, right on the edge of a spot start and a must start because the matchup isn't that good. 49ers showed to be a pretty good defense. Yes, Breece Hall got into the end zone, but he was not as efficient as we're used to seeing. So ultimately, you can start Aaron Jones. When he's on the field, he gets opportunities more often than Ty Chandler. They obviously prioritize him as the feature back. Over 6 yards per carry in week 1, was super efficient. Looked like Himothy again, so you can start him, but that is it. All right, the 9th matchup we're going to look at is the Seahawks at the Patriots. 38.5 point over under, and the Seahawks are favored. How about them Pats, baby? Week 1, upset of the year already. The Bengals do not find a way to win against New England Patriots at home. What the hell is happening? Now, here's the deal. The Patriots defense is actually much better than people anticipate. They gave up the 18th most points in week 1, so they were middle of the pack, but that doesn't mean that you sit Ken Walker. Clearly, you're going to start him, my RB15 on the week. More importantly, Ken Walker dominated touches. I mean, he played 44 snaps compared to 23 for Charbonnet. He took most of the early down work, all of the goal line work. He was in there for 2-minute drill, which was not what we anticipated. Typically, we would think that that would be Zach Charbonnet, but it wasn't. So a top 15 play for me this week versus the Patriots, but you have to know this is the second lowest over-under of the week, so there might not be as many points as we really want. Now, as far as Ramondre Stevenson goes, last week the Seahawks were very good against running backs. Now, that's probably because the Broncos cannot commit to a single running back. They played Audric Estime, Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, but we're in a situation here in New England where Ramondre Stevenson is that dude for this team, all right? Last week, he had 28 total touches in a win versus the Bengals. He is the definition of a workhorse. You can see he played 51 out of 64 snaps, 25 carries. This is a dude, regardless of what format you're in, he should be in your lineup because it's quite obvious they want to make him the focal point of their offense. All right, the 10th matchup we're looking at here is the Jets at the Titans. Let's start with the Jets side of the ball. Breece Hall, you're going to start him. We don't need to talk about that. Was very good in week 1. However, for the Titans, let's talk about it. Tony Pollard did seem to be the guy for this backfield in week 1. He had 20 total touches, including 16 rushing attempts on the ground. If you look at the way they use these backs, they pretty much use Tony Pollard the same way the Titans used Derrick Henry last year. He was the guy on early down work. However, when there was passing downs or passing scenarios, Tajay was the back that they preferred in there. You can see 2-minute drill, Tajay Spears dominated. Third downs, Tajay Spears dominated. Now, for me, thinking about this game, I think this could be a Tajay Spears game. Now, you got to start Pollard, and I'm going to rank him higher, but I think the Jets could bounce back in week 2, and this could be a situation where the Titans desperately need to throw the ball against a very good defense with very good cornerbacks, which means there might be a lot of dump-offs for one Tajay Spears. So I like Tajay as a spot start this week, but clearly Tony's got to be in your lineups as well. The 11th matchup we're going to look at here is the Giants at the Commanders, 43.5 point over under, and the Commanders are favored at home. Two teams, that didn't play so well in week 1. I'd argue that the Commanders played better than the Giants. I think the Giants were maybe the most pitiful performance in week 1. Daniel Jones did not look like he had any idea of what he was doing. And let's talk about the backfield in New York. Devin Singletary is a spot start for me this week. I don't think most of you will want to start him. He had 15 touches last week in a negative game script in a terrible offense. I don't know. I just think it's tough. Like, it's a good matchup versus the Commanders, but you have a terrible offense. I'd say 75% of people have a better option. The good news is Devin Singletary played 50 out of 70 snaps, and he had the majority of the work in that backfield. But what is it really worth in a backfield that's not a good offense? As far as the Commanders go, I was very pleasantly surprised with the way that they used Brian Robinson. He's my RB21 heading into this week. It's a great matchup versus the Giants, who gave up top 10 points to running backs in week 1. Brian Robinson, on the outside looking in, guys, it looks like this is a split backfield. Okay, you can see here, Eckler got 26 plays compared to Brian Robinson's 28. But what I found really interesting is that we were still seeing Brian Robinson used in passing situations. I mean, Brian Robinson himself had 4 targets on the week, the same as Austin Eckler. So clearly they're not afraid to keep Brian Robinson in obvious passing downs. That's very, very good to see. So Brian Robinson, we're going to label a must start. RB21, great matchup. I would not start Eckler, even in negative game scripts. We just saw a negative game script, guys, versus the Bucs, and Eckler wasn't a good start. So I don't really know at what point we can start in Austin Eckler. All right, the 12th matchup we're going to look at. This is the start of the afternoon slate of games. Rams at Cardinals, 49.5 point over under, and the Cardinals are favored at home. How about that? Offense looked really good to start, and then the Bills kind of figured out what they were doing and slowed them down pretty drastically. However, I do think the Cardinals are going to be very competitive in this game. Two teams that could have easily won their matchups, but start the year 0-1. So let's start with the Cardinals side of the ball. Last week, the Rams gave up the 3rd most points to fantasy running backs. The context is important, though, because clearly they faced the Lions, best running back duo maybe in the NFL. So that has a big part to play. But James Conner is still going to be a must start. He was used everywhere. In the air, on the ground, early, often, late, 19 total touches. Purely based off of volume alone and how good this offense can be, he's got to be in your lineups. And Trey Benson is just a stash for right now. As far as Kyren Williams goes, there was a lot of question marks coming in. What would Blake Corum's role be? Blake Corum didn't see a single snap. Now, interesting to note that McVay did come out after the game and say that's not how we wanted the running back rotation to work. He said we wanted to get Ronnie Rivers involved. We wanted to get Blake Corum involved. My question would be, why didn't you then? I mean, you could have done it, but you didn't. But anyway, right now, Kyren Williams looks like a locked and loaded top 6 to 7 play every single week. My RB6 in week 2 versus the Cardinals. They were pretty decent against running backs in week 1. However, I believe their defense is pretty average, and I think this is a very good matchup for Kyren Williams. Dominated opportunities in week 1 with 21 total touches. Wasn't efficient, so that is something we have to monitor. Could Blake Corum get more opportunities if Kyren Williams can't pick up the efficiency? It's something to talk about, but for right now, Kyren's an absolute locked and loaded starter. All right, the 13th matchup we're going to look at here is the Steelers at the Broncos. This is a gross game, guys. This is a disgusting game. 36.5 point over under. This is the lowest over under of the week. So Vegas is telling us this game is probably going to suck the most. It's going to be the most boring. And honestly, when I think about these running backs in this matchup, I'm not excited about any single one of these names. Warren is clearly not someone that you can start. And week 1, he only played 22 total snaps to Najee Harris's 38. Now, he was coming off an injury. There's certainly a chance that his role continues to grow as he gets healthier. But now we got to think about Cordarrelle Patterson. Cordarrelle Patterson is getting 9 snaps in an offense that is not that good, but you're reliant upon volume. That's difficult. You cannot start Jaylen Warren. As far as Najee Harris goes, look, he dominated touches. He had 22 total touches, but he ended up with under 9 fantasy points. Low ceiling offense, it's just not a player that I'm very excited about, but clearly Najee is your floor play. And as far as the Broncos go, it looks like they want to rotate 3 running backs right now. All right, you see Javonte Williams, who had 34 snaps to 24 snaps for Jaleel McLaughlin. But on early downs, Jaleel got work and Javonte got work on third downs. But it was pretty much split across the board. I don't think you can start any one of these names. I love Javonte Williams, a player, but I can't in good conscience tell any one of you to start these names, especially against a very good Steelers defense who were 23rd in points allowed to running backs last week. This is just so messy. Audric Estime is already getting opportunities. I know it was only 3 snaps, but I expected him to be a healthy scratch. So for him to already get some opportunities, this is a gross backfield, guys. Do not touch it if you can help it. All right, the 14th matchup we're going to look at here is the Bengals at the Chiefs. 48.5 point over under, tied for the 3rd highest of the week. The Chiefs are favored at home. Let's start with the Bengals here. Zach Moss, you can start him. He's playing on third downs. You can see that he got the goal line work. He got the majority of the snaps, 33-17 for Chase Brown. So right now he is that dude. And I'm sorry, Chase Brown stands. It doesn't look like they trust Chase Brown on third downs. They don't trust him in pass protection. This is what I was concerned about this preseason. And unfortunately, it looks like it's playing out. Now, as far as the Chiefs go, this is very simple. You start Isaiah Pacheco and you don't overthink it. Top 10 offense in the NFL, top 12 play literally every single week, regardless of matchup. This moves us on to Sunday Night Football. Bears at Texans, 46.5 point over under. For the Bears, I don't really feel comfortable starting any running back here. If you have to, of course, that name is going to be DeAndre Swift. But I mean, he had 50% of this team's rushing attempts and 1 target in week 1. This offense is not firing on all cylinders. This Texans defensive line is nasty. They gave up the 3rd fewest points to running backs in week 1. I'd say 50% of people have a better option than DeAndre Swift in their flex spot heading into week 2. I mean, he's not even like the 3rd or 4th target on this team. It's just devastating to see for him. As far as the Texans side of the ball, this is super simple. You start Joe Mixon. Joe Moneybags was incredible in week 1. 33 total touches, 26.8 PPR fantasy points. I mean, he was absolutely dominant. This is why we were drafting him everywhere. Not because of his efficiency, but because he's on a good offense and he's going to dominate touches. That's exactly what he did in week 1. That's what I think he'll do in week 2. And the last matchup of the week is Monday Night Football. We've got Falcons at Eagles, 47.5 point over under. The Eagles are favored at home. 2 defenses that are very good against the run, but 2 superstars that have to be in your lineups. You're starting Bijan Robinson, 23 touches in week 1, tied a career high for him, including 5 targets. He was the offense for the Atlanta Falcons. He was the focal point of the offense. That should continue. For the Eagles, Saquon Barkley's coming off a 3-touchdown game. Of course you're going to start him. It's not a good matchup. Falcons are a good run D, but of course you're going to start Saquon Barkley. So we just talked about every matchup. We probably talked about more than 50 running backs. How do you guys feel? Hopefully this is everything you need to go make the right decisions. But hey, you might not know exactly what player to start. Why don't you check out the pinned comment? You can actually ask us a question through our website at any point. Doesn't matter if we are live streaming or if we are off air. You can ask us a question at any time. Start, sits, trade questions. You can get a team review, whatever your heart desires. And if you want our weekly rankings, then consider becoming a Mother Flocker member with the promo code LAND. If you become a yearly member, we will give you a free team review as well. I appreciate y'all watching. Drop a like, subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Wide receivers should be coming soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.